Lovers of lore, thank you for joining me for an unexpected installment of Phyrexia-based lore. This just came out today, and it's based around Elish Norn being the mother of machines. So the story starts out in the Fair Basilica, which is a location on the plain of New Phyrexia. Elish Norn is ruling over the machine orthodoxy. She is surrounded by her troops, some of which who have been made through birthing pods, and others are individuals who were originally residents of the world of Mirrodin and have been converted into proper Phyrexians. So Elish Norn essentially, as the mother of machines, basks in this constant adulation. There are these prayers that are constantly being chanted in the background wherever she goes, right? And in this part of the story, she is addressing her followers. She is standing in front of them at a dais, and she is holding up a member of the Mirran resistance, which still exists. And that is a human being who's just struggling feebly in her claw as she's being held up. And Elish Norn is disdainfully just basically ragdolling this individual for the crowd's amusement and as a display of Phyrexian power, right? Now, for some reason, Elish Norn finds the look of this human being to be familiar to her, but she can't really put her finger on it. Obviously, if this is someone she had run into before, it can't be the same person because Elish Norn isn't going to allow someone to survive. So, as this individual is squirming in her claws, she ends up getting injured. Now, Elish Norn had considered just handing the survivor off to some lower level members, but she instead decided to use her to set an example. So Elish Norn punctures her own arm and takes out a single drop of her Phyrexian blood, which is pure glistening oil. And in Elish Norn's view, is the purest form of Phyrexian oil. At this point, she's become so powerful that a single drop of her purified oil will essentially convert an entire being to a Phyrexian. And that is the process that she initiates at this point, dropping the oil directly onto the struggling Mirran survivor. And it basically coats down her head until it reaches the wounds that Elish Norn's claw has placed, and then basically seeps inside of the resistance survivor, right? And at this point, what is normally supposed to happen starts to happen, where the black corrosion starts to flow to the eyes and the mouth, and the body starts to shake the littlest bit, but ultimately these conversions go without too much of a difference from that. This one goes wildly different, because right after that, the body starts to bulge and surge outwards as the flesh pushes against its constraints and starts to burst open. And then gigantic roots start to blast out in all kinds of different directions, while thick, goopy, disgusting blood splorps down onto the ground, right? Now, Norn is massively taken aback by this. She has no idea what's going on, and for a moment just stands there kind of going, whoa, what is the deal here? Until ultimately just, boom, takes the human's head off, and then the body just kind of half shrivels and falls to the ground, right? Obviously being a very strange occurrence. So Elish Norn basically says to the assembled Phyrexians, this Mirran was so corrupt that not even the completion of Phyrexia could save it. But internally, Elish Norn is freaking out, right? She's using this as an example for the followers of what they need to be fighting against, but internally, this goes against everything that Norn understands, right? Because Norn has essentially just lived a life of success, basically taking all of Mirrodin, turning it into New Phyrexia under her rule. There are other praetors, right? But Norn is at the pinnacle. She's right up at the top. So she's really troubled by what's happened here, right? The oil always works the same way. The ritual always goes the same way. It removes the memories, attachment, desires, but none of these other crazy effects with roots and this thickening of the blood. So Norn had the body sent off for study, right? Because humans don't have this type of power. And what does this mean? What has changed overall on the world of New Phyrexia that this is something that's going down, right? So from that point, basically, she ends up noticing that there is a tiny green plant that's growing out in the courtyard in the same place that Mirren's body had fallen. And this obviously infuriates and confuses Norn at the same time, but mostly she's furious. This is organic blasphemy. A purely organic being in her place of perfection? No. So she strode over to rip it out of the ground. Now, when she tried to do that, she found that it was slick and almost wily. It was difficult to actually get a grip on, but she managed to eventually get a grip on it. And at that point, she realizes this is incredibly difficult to pull out of the ground. It must have some really strong roots. But when she pulls it up, instead of the roots that you would expect from a plant, there's a huge half-rotted human arm hanging there in place of the roots. So Norn tosses this away in disgust, but then when she looks, she can see that 5 more of these plants have popped up all over the courtyard, and she's not having it. So she's going over there, tearing them up, and each one she does, different body parts are there. Lungs, a heart, ears, teeth, right? But the thing is, none of these are parts of the original Mirren, right? The Mirren that she had destroyed that fell down onto the pavement there where these plants are growing up. None of these are from her, right? And the study of the body showed that Mirren was normal aside from the actual roots that burst forth. There was nothing else to make this human seem like it was anything other than a regular human. Now, this is a big problem for Norn, right? She's freaking out. How had the oil's touch caused this situation? And at this point, that chorus of prayers that always follows her around starts to falter because her followers can sense basically her uncertainty, and it is sowing doubt within them. So Norn needs to firm that belief up. Now, while all this is happening, the sky has also darkened. And Elish Norn is not sure, but she thinks she can see a figure up there in the sky. Is there someone up in the sky? Her world was out of sync, and she could feel it internally. And when she looked back down, every single plant she had torn up, all the holes that had been created, were now all filled with new plants. And on top of that, there were even more plants. There was more corruption in her perfect realm. There were even some limbs above ground now, all rotting and mushy. And it started to make Norn question herself. Am I impure? Am I unfit to lead? Because humans don't have the power to do this. So maybe this is actually keyed into my blood, specifically the oil itself, and I'm the reason that this happened. And the more she tried to zero in on that, the more everything started to feel unreal. And then Norn started to think back about what she had learned about humans and the concept of dreams, right? Because as previously said, Phyrexian oil removes all of that stuff, but she had experienced what humans were like before having all that removed. And it basically snapped into her mind, wait a minute, this is basically a dreamscape that I have to be in. That has to be what's going on. There's no other possible explanation, right? So this is the human concept of dreams. Completion removes that. And at that point, it kind of slams into Norn's mind, wait a minute, this has to be Ashiok. Because Norn at this point is so informed about what's going on in the multiverse that she knows about a number of planeswalkers, and she is aware specifically of Ashiok, the planeswalker who has the ability to manipulate dreams, and more specifically is essentially a connoisseur of nightmares, right? So Norn obviously is angry at this point and calls Ashiok out. Ashiok appears, and, Norn's raging at this point with the whole we are Phyrexia, how dare you do this level sort of thing. Because remember, Norn is incredibly full of herself, right? So the fact that Ashiok would dare to mess with the perfection of the best Phyrexian is completely unacceptable, right? So Ashiok basically said, look, I had no idea if this was even going to work. I thought that this was a great test idea. Basically, I just wanted to see what a Phyrexian nightmare would be like, and I wanted to use basically the best Phyrexian I could find. And it's interesting to learn that you guys, basically Phyrexians, don't feel fear the same way. And Norn's affronted by this, right? She says, we are perfection. We know no fear. But inside, Norn's doubting it. And at the same time, Ashiok just knows legitimately. It's like, we both know that's not true. I wouldn't be here, right? Ashiok is literally a nightmare master. Nightmares are definitely fear-based, right? So you can't really pretend like you don't have fear. So Ashiok goes on to reveal that Ashiok found out about the Phyrexians through Elspeth's dream. And basically, as well, that's why Elspeth was shown earlier in that sort of avatar to Norn. It's like, okay, this is Elspeth. Why is she familiar? It's for this reason. So I learned about her from you. Elspeth actually managed to escape from you, right? Now, Norn is raging. It's like, we're not a tool for you to mess around with. Elspeth did not escape us. And at this point, Ashiok is smirking, but that smirk disappears when all of a sudden a dozen Phyrexians come out of the darkness behind Ashiok. And Ashiok's freaking out, basically saying, hey, I didn't create these individuals. What's going on here with this? This is my nightmare. I made this nightmare. What are these Phyrexians doing here? Well, Norn is powerful enough and Phyrexians are alien enough that she is able to essentially have a level of control over her own dreams. So Norn says, you've underestimated us, and Ashiok summons up her own defenders in the form of taking all the crazy body parts that are spread all across the gardens, and they all kind of congeal into weird mockeries of Phyrexians and come lumbering forwards. But between the dozen Phyrexians and Elish Norn, those weird little flesh golems, honestly, they don't really stand a chance. So they get obliterated pretty easily, right? And then at that point, that's when Ashiok takes all of the flesh and assembles it into a massive flesh golem, right? It's made of smoke and flesh, and it's the same shape as Elish Norn. So it's got like Elish Norn's basic outline and shape, but it's made of smoke and a bunch of this rotting flesh, and it has Elspeth's face, right? And it's literally mimicking her. Like if you've ever played Legend of Zelda, Shadow Link will do your same moves and everything like that. One of those style scenarios. So basically, Norn is staring into her own duplicate made out of this flesh. And as Norn moves, the copy moves perfectly too. So Norn is able to read her own fear in the movement of the Elspeth flesh golem, which is absolutely an amazing way to transmit the concept of the fear. So I really enjoyed that particular concept, picturing this big towering flesh golem in a mockery of Norn, right? You've got a planeswalker, Ashiok, who's powerful enough to mess with the nightmares of Phyrexians. And then you have Phyrexians who are powerful enough to be able to control their own nightmares they didn't even know they were in, that are under the control of another planeswalker, right? Like, that is some epic level action right there. So you've got this gigantic Elspeth flesh golem. You've got Norn at first registering that fear, but then getting angry and hardening her arm into a giant blade and just hacking the flesh golem clean in half, and then turning to Ashiok in full rage mode. At that point, Ashiok basically says, I'm dipping out, flies off into the air, allowing for Norn being a masterpiece, basically saying straight up, you are a work of perfection, right? So as Ashiok leaves, the nightmare starts to fade away, right? The garden, all of these body parts, everything start to slowly fade away. But the very last thing, the final thing left from the nightmare as it fades away, is Elspeth's face. And right before it fades away, its eyes open, it locks eyes with Norn. And in Elspeth's flesh golem face there is pity and sympathy for Norn. And this is just the point where Norn cracks and can't take it. She basically is unwilling to accept her own fear in this scenario and decides that the only way she's going to be able to purge her fear is to find and destroy Elspeth. So they are setting up the confrontation where we have just seen in the New Capenna story, Elspeth getting the Halo Blade, which is anathema to Phyrexia. And now we have Elish Norn, the mother of machines, leading over Phyrexia, getting ready for this epic confrontation between the two. So I have to say, I was super stoked to find this lore today. I hope you enjoyed it, my friends. If you like what we're doing on this channel, consider supporting us on Patreon. I will see you all next time. And remember, my friends, lore is life.